Breaking news. Fernando Tatis Jr., star player of the San Diego Padres, breaks his wrist. What does it mean? What's the recovery timeline? Let's break it down and how it could happen this way. This is Dr. David Chao, Sports Injury Central, Pro Football Doc. First off, I'm a big fan of Fernando Tatis Jr. He's my son's favorite player. I live in San Diego. This is not based on any inside information, more just insider knowledge of having dealt with baseball teams before and also in consultation with the pro baseball docs at Sports Injury Central. So here's the breaking news, no pun intended. He had a press conference today, the GM as well, and according to AJ Preller, Fernando Tatis has a fractured wrist, up to 3 months of recovery timeline. It is identified as the scaphoid bone, according to Preller, who says it occurred early in the offseason and flared back up when Tatis began to swing a few weeks ago. Surgery is a distinct possibility. Let's get into what might have happened, and I believe the news is even worse than what AJ Preller is letting on right now. Fernando Tatis admitted to saying there's a couple of minor incidents in the offseason, what likely led to the fracture, said it could have been anything. He also says without the lockout, it definitely could have been a different story right now. Let's address both those points. He did have an injury, accident in the Dominican that Kevin Acee reported on, and was said to have minor injuries and released from the hospital involving a motorcycle accident, etc. There also was apparently an Instagram stories from his mom, as you see here, and he does have some sort of wrist splint cast on that includes his thumb, which would be consistent with a scaphoid base of the wrist, base of the thumb fracture, that sort of immobilization. Those are famous for perhaps not showing up on x-ray early on and then not healing because of lack of blood flow. As to the lockout, it could be a different story. If he were in the Dominican, it wouldn't have been a different story. If he would have been working out with the team, maybe it'd be a different story. But certainly a simple follow-up x-ray or CT scan or MRI would have shown this even in the Dominican. So I'm not sure how much the lockout had to do with this or not. But what does it mean now? In terms of the lockout, it's also said here it would have been taken care of in a normal off-season. Maybe if he were vacationing in the Dominican the whole time, then maybe not, but we'll see. So here's the news definitively from Dennis Lin that he is headed for surgery that could come with a recovery timeline of up to 3 months. I feel, and the pro baseball docs feel, that that is overly optimistic. The scaphoid fracture likely happened in the December 8th motorcycle accident. The x-ray findings were normal, as can be typical. He had temporary mobilization. It felt like a wrist sprain to him, and that's defensible. This is a common thing that happens, and it just didn't get better. And as he ramps up for baseball activities, he starts to feel it. Then on entry physical to the Padres, it gets discovered because he complains of some wrist soreness, and repeat x-ray shows the fracture. But if the fracture was from December, this is now March. This is now at least what you would call a delayed union or non-union, where the fracture hasn't healed. And this is typical for a scaphoid fracture because of the lack of blood flow. This is why he will absolutely have surgery now. In fact, he's likely to have bone graft taken locally from the wrist, from the hip, or cadaver to aid in the healing, because this is no longer an acute primary fracture. This is a delayed or non-union fracture, and bone graft will help the healing. The 3-month timeline, in our opinion, is very optimistic. That is best case scenario. And maybe Tatis can do that because he's been the matrix and superhuman in what he can do even with his shoulder. So let's hope for that. But we don't feel it's very realistic. If everything went as planned, he has surgery now with the bone graft. He could miss just the first 2 months of the season because the season's about a month away right now. The reality is, if you told me he could return by the All-Star break, which is missing 3 months of games, 4 months from this surgery, I'd say take it. That would be still a little bit on the optimistic side. This easily could be 6 months before he's fully back from his left wrist scaphoid fracture, because this is no longer an acute fracture. It's a delayed healing fracture that will need a bone graft, in the pro baseball doc's opinion. Look, I'm not calling anybody out. AJ Preller is doing his job. He's a great GM, but historically he's been optimistic on injuries, and maybe that's a good thing for a GM to be. And the bottom line here, the scaphoid is a slow healing bone due to poor blood flow, and with the likely need of bone graft and fixation, it's probably a 4 to 6 month recovery timeline. Let's hope it's sooner than that, but this certainly changes the Padres' fortunes. It changes the MVP race. It changes RBI expectations for Tatis. It changes a lot of things. Coming into this season, the biggest worry for Tatis was his shoulder, his left shoulder recurrent dislocation, where he dislocated 5 times last year, and he did not have surgery on that to fix the labrum. He missed 25 games last year. He's likely to miss 25 to 30 games this year due to his shoulder because it hasn't been fixed yet. Now he's going to miss minimum 2 months, easily 3-4 months or more of the season. Unfortunately, Tatis is going to miss a lot of time this year for our San Diego Padres, and I'll have to break the news to my son later today as well. Hopefully he can outperform these expectations. We don't mean to be negative, but biology is biology, and this is from the insider knowledge of the pro baseball docs at Sports Injury Central. Thanks for watching.